the best player on every hero in Overwatch League Season 4. This has quite easily been one of the most heavily requested videos on my channel, and now that I'm finally out of school, it's time for me to give you guys what you have been asking for. But before we dive into things, it would mean so much to me and it would really make my day if you could give this video a like, subscribe if you're new, and share this video with an Overwatch League loving friend because I worked really hard on it and it took a lot of time. Anyway, let's lay out some ground rules for the sucker before we get started. Rule number 1 is that a player is only eligible for a specific hero if they played said hero during the year. 2. Any player who retired mid-season is not eligible, so that means somebody like Striker is not going to be considered. 3. I will be using both gameplay and statistics to back up my claims, so sorry in advance if you don't care for stats, too bad. And 4, this is all my opinion, yada yada yada. None of this should be considered a fact, and don't get triggered, and don't spoil the whole video, blah blah blah. You get the idea. Don't be a jerk. Don't get mad over what somebody on the internet said. Enough said though. Let's get into the list going from left to right on the hero selection screen, which means that D.Va starts us off. World-class D.Va players can be spotted left and right in 2021. You can never go wrong with like Hanbin, Fury, Void, or even Hawk. But I for one think this year it has to be Void. For the second year in a row, he felt like the most dominant D.Va player to me. There's just something about the way he plays that I can't get enough of. It's the level of contributions with the tiny death rate that really does it for me. His awareness is just so amazing. He always knew when to get aggressive or when to protect his teammates, but he also didn't put himself at risk all that often. We're talking the second lowest death rate on D.Va in the league at 3.5 deaths per 10, with a top 3 hero damage rate and top 4 elimination average. And he's just stupid levels of clutch. Think back to that huge bomb against the Dallas Fuel. Void was a god D.Va, enough said. On to Orisa, and this was a two-man race for me. It had to either be Gator or Fate. Ultimately though, I decided to pick Gator here. She's always been a strong suit of his, and this year was definitely no different. Atlanta had high levels of success on double shield comms, and Gator's productivity on Orisa is a huge reason why. It felt like his pulls were usually on point. He set up Hawk and the DPS well, and he happened to charge up superchargers faster than anybody else in the league as seen by his top damage rate. The faster you're getting that ultimate, the better because of how impactful it is. And although she's not really thought of in that way, Gator made some decent individual plays on Orisa, which is pretty nice. That's pretty high value through and through. Next we've got Reinhardt. I'm not sure if this will be seen as controversial or not, but my pick is actually going to be Fearless. Statistically, he was top 3 in hero damage and was number 1 both in final blows and eliminations. But what I find even more impressive is that he outplayed all of the other top Rein players of the league. There's plenty of examples of him outplaying Super and guys like Gator as well in those heavy Rein compositions. If you're making the more game-defining plays against the best players on that character, there's really no other evidence that you need, and that is why I believe that Fearless ultimately takes home number 1 Rein. Next is more of a meme pick. Roadhog is on the chopping block, ladies and gentlemen, and unlike last year, he pretty much had no relevance from start to finish. Want to know how many people played him for at least 5 minutes? 4. Yep, that's it. The only 2 guys off that group with any sort of memorable moment was probably Gesture and Don. But honestly, whenever Gesture played Hog, it felt like Soul were kind of failing, so by default, I guess that means that Don is the winner. It's really not a huge honor, but he did find a fair bit of success on Hog. He helped win a round of Ilios against the Justice that one time, and there was that nice pop-off moment or two on Eichenwald against Toronto. So just for the simple fact that he did something, he's the winner. Now time for Sigma. While his relevance wasn't quite the same as last year, quite a few players showed off big time with him. Fury, Hawk, Void, Gargoyle, they were all fantastic. But there's really one guy who stands head and shoulders above the rest of the pack, and that man has to be Piggy. He absolutely decimated the competition on Sigma. His teammates often made fun of him as like a supposed Sigma one-trick because he was just that crazy on him. And I mean, it's pretty easy to see why. He was so disgustingly productive. Not a single player came anywhere near him in terms of kill contributions. He's the only Sigma player in the league with 2 hours or more of playtime, with 10,000 damage per 10, 20 or more eliminations, and less than 4 deaths. How can you put in that much work and get fluxes like they're nothing, but practically never pay for it with your life? Piggy was in a class of his own. There was no player as good with applying pressure to the enemy, and his efficiency with gravitic flux was pretty solid. You'd think a hero like Sigma, who has a pretty high skill cap, would be a harder pick, but Piggy made it really easy. Speaking of easy picks, that gets us into Winston, and you already know the deal. It's gotta be Fearless. No other main tank comes all that close either. There were some other good ones for sure, but nobody had that same value as Fearless consistently. It was some of the most dominant Winston play in League history. Even when Winston became less viable, Dallas would still have Fearless play that role anyway, because that's how much his Winston meant to the team. It didn't matter if something like Wrecking Ball is a better option, because Winston, he was just so strong on it. It was something that Dallas always felt comfortable building around. If they would rather play Monkey than risk having Fearless play more of a meta hero, then that is a big time statement in my eyes. All you really gotta do is go back to the June Joust when Dallas were pretty much putting all of the resources into him to see why they'd do this strategy. When Fearless is enabled, even just a little bit, it's game over. His hard carry performances and primal rage uses were god tier. There is no other person to select for this award. End of story. Fearless reigns supreme. Next is Wrecking Ball. It almost doesn't feel right saying this, but this is the first time ever where Among will not be taking home this award. This is the first one in 3 years. That's pretty crazy. Him, Gaga, and Fate were all elite, but after seriously putting some thought into it, I decided to pick Fate. He is the best option in my eyes, and I say that for 2 reasons. One, he was very underappreciated on the Shanghai Dragons at times whenever he used Wrecking Ball. I don't think people realize how many opportunities he handed on a silver platter to his teammates. His pile drives were amazing all the time, they led to a lot of insane follow-up, and he deserves all the credit in the world. But also, Fate has literally outplayed the other top Wrecking Ball players. Fate beat both Among and Gaga in the mirror during the Summer Showdown. This one is definitely close, don't get me wrong. Gaga and Among were both nuts, and it really does depend on what you value more, what kind of style you like the best with this character. Fate was more team-oriented, but Gaga and Among are more on the individual side of things. But when I look at all the proof and think of the memorable moments, Fate is the guy who comes to mind for me. I preferred his style. He was the savior who helped the Dragons end the Fuel's dominance, and he was the glue who bound Shanghai Sombra dive comp together whenever he played ball. So I can say, with only a little bit of hesitation I guess, that Fate is the man. Wrapping up tanks is none other than Zarya. This is another difficult one. Nobody had more than 5 hours on her. She was more of a rarity this year. The top options for me are Piggy, Late Young, and Hanbin. Each of them put up nearly 8k damage per 10 minutes. The problem is, none of them were absurdly memorable to me, so I guess it really comes down to the nitty-gritty. So if that's the case, I'm just gonna pick Hanbin and move on with my life. Hanbin had some pretty well-placed bubbles on Fearless to help him pop off, and Hanbin himself had a few shining moments where he rolled just about everybody. I think back to that first week against the Gladiators or Havana against Washington in the playoffs. It's not exactly easy to think of tons of moments where Zarya was going off this year due to the small sample size, but I would say that Hanbin arguably had more than the rest, so that seems like a good enough reason to me to give him the Best Zarya award. Alrighty, tanks are done. DPS time. Ashe is at the plate first. In my eyes, this one goes to Lip, straight up. A good argument could definitely be made for Shy as well, but Lip had the better consistency and stats in my opinion. He led the rest of the pack who played Ashe for at least 2 hours with 12.5k damage per 10. Combine that with the second highest final blow rate and the highest eliminations, and the choice is easy. Lip had a masterclass year on this hero. We tend to think of his Sombra among other things, but Ashe was low-key one of his best characters. Some of the shots this guy was hitting were out of this world, and he was farming bobs left and right. It's that constant damage and dominance that really does it for me. It's that ability to constantly shut down any opposing hit scans, which made his Ashe that valuable. It's a close battle between him and Shy for sure, but I favor Lip for that constant dominance. So who's next? Oh, it's Bastion. Considering that nobody played him for more than 3 minutes, I'm just gonna give this one to Prophet. He's one of only 2 guys to play him in a real composition this year. The other guy was Mirror, but I think Prophet did a bit more during the time he actually played Bastion. It's kind of one of those YOLO picks. There's not much else to say. Prophet did well that one time on like a couple of fights against alexyOWL, so let's give it to him by default. Next we have Cassidy, formerly known as McCree. There was a good handful of excellent players on this character during the season. Kai, Leave, Fitz, Flora, Shy, lots of pop-off moments to be had. But my personal favorite Cassidy player of Season 4 was Lip. He had a good bit of dirty moments. Cassidy was by no means his top hero, but man did he put in the work when he got to play him. I can still vividly recall the times where he absolutely devastated both Seoul and Philly. There was no one quite as good, I feel. He isn't number one in any of the main stats or averages, but he's got the big moments to make up for it. Shanghai weren't much of a rush team, so he honestly wasn't even playing at his true potential. The fact that he could still make so many big plays anyway in such a little amount of time is impressive. That's all I've got to say about Cassidy, so let's roll on to Doomfist. Only 6 players netted at least a half hour of playtime on him. Most of these guys would just whip him out on control from time to time, and that was basically the extent of his use. Only 2 guys were really an exception to this, Mirror and Sparkle. But you know, Sparkle had the greater sample size at over 4 hours, and numerous examples of success on the hero against multiple teams, so I feel pretty comfortable giving this award to Sparkle. Dallas could comfortably run Sparkle on the Doomfist at times without having to worry about a decline in performance. Whether it would be against the Reign, Justice, or somebody else, Sparkle found a way to be effective. Considering that most teams didn't even find Doomfist comps viable in 2021, I would say that Sparkle has a leg up on most of the competition on this specific hero. How about we discuss more of a relevant hero now? It's time for Echo. The league had some crazy disgusting Echoes this year. Sparkle, Pelican, Leave, Shy, Yaki, Fleta, the list goes on and on. These guys were all so amazing, and that's only a small sample size. For me though, it's gotta be Leave. His consistency on this character was almost unmatched basically. He possessed the explosiveness of somebody like Sparkle, but also the clutch duplicates of Pelican. But he also was just really amazing statistically. He was one of 2 players with double-digit final blows per 10, and the only guy with at least 20 eliminations. Something else worth considering is how he had just as many final blows basically as Pelican, with an hour of less playtime and almost as many elims as Sparkle, despite Sparkle playing Echo for a lot longer. Not gonna lie, I was pretty close to picking Pelican here instead. His damage stats are also top tier with a league low 4.2 deaths per 10. He definitely had a lot of efficiency going for himself, but something about Leave's Echo hit different. It's difficult to explain. Just the fact that he could do so much with less of a sample size really stands out to me. Speaking of small sample sizes, that brings us to Genji, where I yet again am calling Sparkle the best. Unlike last year, Sparkle is not the top Genji statistically. That's why the likes of Valentine, Prophet, Kevster, Choice A1, and Leave are right on his tail. But like I said with Lip on Cassidy, sometimes it really just comes down to the memorable moments more than anything else. The guy usually made the big impact plays with Genji. The game against London immediately comes to mind to me, but that is far from the only example out there. He had a lot of great moments. Genji saw little play time, but even so, Sparkle has a large portfolio full of great plays on Genji, hence why I am giving him the title of Best Genji in 2021. But how about Hanzo? There was a lot of fun moments involving sick Hanzo plays this year. Honorable mentions definitely go out to Birdring, Lip, Kai, and Fitz here. They were all elite, but I gotta go with Leave once again because what he did on Hanzo in 2021 is pretty ridiculous. He's the final blow leader and is tied for the top elimination rate. He was always a threat on those long-ranged, Hanzo-friendly maps. It didn't matter the team or the stakes. He made teams like the Mayhem and the Reign feel his wrath in 2 separate tournaments where Chengdu were trying to prove they were a top team. His clutch factor, in my opinion, was number 1. It's true that Lip was also a god Hanzo, especially during the grand finals, but compared to Leave, he just doesn't have as many clutch feats. It felt like Leave could always bail out his team whenever Chengdu were in a jam, and that's pretty impressive considering that Chengdu were, noticeably worse than the Dragons. The Dragons were simply a better team. That's maximum impact that nobody else reached nearly as often. Leave's a god gamer, what else can I really say? And now we're back into irrelevant hero territory again because it's Junkrat time. Only 4 players used Junk for more than 5 minutes. I could maybe just go with Jake for the memes, but the fact of the matter is, I believe someone had an even more impactful performance. The best Junkrat of 2021, in my opinion, was Aspire. He averaged 10k damage per 10 with 12 final blows and 22 eliminations. The sample size is small, but still, that's pretty crazy. While Jake gave the Florida Mayhem trouble that one time on Anubis defense, he wasn't really the main focus necessarily. Aspire, on the other hand, absolutely rolled Florida on Lijiang Control Center with a bunch of key kills to help his team win the round. For the tiny amount of playtime we're working with, I would say that warrants Aspire taking home the best Junkrat. Next on the list is Mei, and this is an easy one for me because it just simply has to be Pelican. I don't think it's all that close either. I know we usually think of Echo for Pelican, but Mei low-key might have been his best hero last year. He is ultimately a huge reason why the Reign had such a great rush composition. His intelligence, wall positioning, and blizzard efficiency were top-notch. He Mei diffed more players than I can count. Playing Atlanta on a Mei rush mirror was a death wish for pretty much everybody. There are very few places in this video where the selection is this easy for a super relevant hero. Pelican had the impressive eye test feats and top hero damage as well, with only 5 deaths per 10. His Mei reminded me heavily of Rascals back in 2019, and if you're getting that level of praise, it kinda goes without saying that you just have to be at the top. Now we're on to Pharah, and despite the little gameplay that we saw for this year, we witnessed a lot of elite play. Sparkle, Fleta, Naga, Kevster, they were all pretty goated. But you know, there was only one guy who consistently played Pharah and had it be a pivotal part of his team's game plan on a bunch of different nights. And that, my friends, is Jinmu. He is my top Pharah of 2021 for that simple fact alone. Chengdu depended on Jinmu's Pharah time after time and usually came up huge for them. He got a fair number of player of the matches on Pharah, and you could say what you will about the rest of his hero pool, but that Pharah of his caused a lot of problems. We're talking 12k damage per 10 with well over 800 total eliminations. Making a, I would say, fairly niche hero from a league standpoint work so well is worthy of praise. I appreciate the impact that Jinmu consistently had. Teams knew exactly what he was going to play, but that doesn't mean they could stop him. Now for the edgelord himself, Reaper. I'd say the strongest Reaper in the league was Lip. Doha and Decay, they're pretty close, but Lip was especially good at asserting his dominance, and as you all know, I'm a sucker for that huge clutch moment against the Fuel on Junkertown. And it's not just that. Whenever Lip busted out the Reaper, in general really, you knew the other team was going to be in a lot of trouble. Go back to any game where Lip actually used Reaper, and I guarantee you, at least in most of those situations, there's going to be at least one moment where he gets a multi-kill or two. He even set the 2021 Final Blows record on Busan and Eichenwald on Reaper. Additionally, he led the league in damage and elimination averages. One final thing to add on is that I thought that Lip's style of play was very punishing for the opposition to deal with. He was especially good at capitalizing on other people's mistakes and turning said mistakes into big plays. Now for Soldier 76. Let's be honest, this character was pretty irrelevant as well. Only one guy even came close to having an hour of playtime on him, and that man happens to be Fleta, so we're just gonna pick him and move forward because Shanghai did make the Soldier work on a couple of different occasions. Each time Fleta broke it out on Control, it looked just as clean as it did way back in 2018 on Soul. Fleta was not number 1 in every play statistically, but he holds a pretty respectable place in each category, including the number 1 elimination rate in the league. But other than that, I really have nothing else to add. There's not much to say here. That's all I've got. Which now means that we advance to Sombra, and while there were a handful of respectable Sombra players this year, I'd say that Lip is the only realistic choice, because just like last year, his Sombra in 2021 was a game changer. He is a huge reason why the Dragons were the best Sombra ball/dive team in the league. I feel that his style of play on this character is so mentally taxing to deal with. There's no Sombra in the league who plays as aggressively as Lip. He pestered enemy tank lines constantly and charged up those EMPs extremely fast, the fastest in the league more specifically. Outpacing enemy Sombras in the mirror was a common occurrence thanks to his league-high 7,200 damage per 10. That's about 1,000 more than Doha, who was one of the only guys who you could even consider comparing to Lip. And sure, sometimes Lip's EMPs were not the greatest, but when you charge them up as fast as he does, it really doesn't matter all that much. Not to mention that he had other ways of being effective. His manual hacks were pretty gnarly, and that constant pressure made him someone you always had to think about. The man had that hero on lockdown, and he lived in other people's heads rent-free. Advancing to Symmetra, I found her role in 2021 to be very interesting. It felt like those who knew how to properly utilize her and had great strategies with this character had a big advantage over the rest of the competition. And that's exactly why I feel that Sparkle was the top Symmetra. Him and Dallas knew how to get creative with her, and they dominated. Sparkle helped turn a weakness into a strength that could help this team get away with a lack of hit scan options. It gave them another choice that really gave the enemy teams a lot of trouble. Instead of matching teams on something that Dallas were kind of just going to be disadvantaged on, they'd have Sparkle opt into Symmetra at times on on those control maps. The Mei melee saw this work like a charm. Sparkle outputted some respectable stats on Symmetra while providing his team versatility on what they could run on control maps. All in all, Sparkle had a high success rate on Sim with an admirable 60% win rate, so why not go with him? He's by no means the common consensus pick, but he definitely does have a top choice in most people's eyes. Speaking of making things work, it's time to dive into Torbjorn. Compared to last year, his selection was a bit more niche this time. He was mostly used for rush comps and counter dive, and if there's one team who found great success in both of those instances, it was Pelican. If Pelican wasn't dominating on the Mei in those Atlanta rush comps, he was usually frustrating his dive-happy enemies with Torb. It made for a deadly alternative with Atlanta's rush composition, and boy oh boy was he oppressive to deal with. There were multiple cases where he frustrated the hell out of Dallas in their dive. And that's a pretty big deal considering how strong Dallas were on anything dive-oriented. That's more than enough reason to say that he's qualified for this award. If you could give Dallas problems on this one hero in more than one match, you've got to be doing something special. And the stats back up this claim, because at over 12k damage and 7 final blows per 10, Pelican's Torbjorn was a pretty solid option for the Reign all year round. Next on the list of damage dealers is Tracer. The league had so many prolific Tracer players in 2021. Sparkle, Fleta, Kevster, Yaki, Prophet, Flora, etc. I can name off names all day long, but among all of those great players is one true king. It's a close race for sure, but I'm going with Leave. Tracer was his trademark hero during his MVP campaign. The level of dominance he put on display with Tracer is among one of the biggest reasons why he won the MVP award. Only Lip averaged more damage, final blows, and eliminations, but you also have to keep in mind that he played this hero far less than Leave did. If Lip maybe played this hero a lot longer, then I might be willing to give it to him, but the simple fact of the matter is, Leave was great on Tracer from the start of May, basically, all the way until the end of the season. To further put his consistency and dominance into perspective, though, Leave played Tracer for 3 hours less than the only 3 guys with more total final blows than him, and he still almost hits the same mark as all of them. He even had a Fleta deadlift on Volskaya Industries against Dallas with a ludicrous 26 final blows in one map. In addition to the top tier stats, he also just has many memorable hard carry plays as any of the other God Tracers in this league do. Again, part of the reason he won MVP was because of his heroics on Tracer and the team wipes. No matter the skill level of the enemy team, Leave would always clutch up on this character. In most of the biggest games of Chengdu's season, Leave was showing up on this hero, and it was usually in a big way that grabbed your attention. Dallas, Seoul, and Atlanta fans are among others who felt the pain that he caused in tournament scenarios. Leave's Tracer was so insanely memorable, which is why he ultimately wins me over as the league's top Tracer in 2021. And that now brings us to the final DPS, Widowmaker. Most players only utilized her for around an hour. Carpe, Lip, Kai, I think they all immediately come to mind to me as top options despite the small sample size, but since the success rate and playtime don't play much of a role into this one, I'm simply just going to go off who made the biggest plays that I can seriously remember. And that honor has to belong to none other than Kai. When you think back to Widow takeovers, Kai had a couple of games where he absolutely styled on the enemy team. Vancouver and London both truly felt his wrath this year. Technically, he really didn't do much in meaningful situations on her, I guess you could say, but that was pretty much everybody considering the lack of playtime. When going off pure impact, I think that Kai takes the cake. I wish I could elaborate more here, but I really can't. Widow was so insignificant in this year's meta, so I doubt anybody even cares that much. Headshot go burr, that's all there is to it. With damage out of the way, we can get into our final role, support. First up is Ana. Guys like Shu, Iris, Alarm, and Fielder were all a treat to watch, but the guy I found to be the most impactful on Ana in 2021 is Izayaki. Stay mad about me picking yet another Shanghai player if you want to, but Izayaki was undeniably great. If you think otherwise, you're most likely a hater. This isn't like 2020 where Izayaki was arguably the weakest link on his team. He was a top tier support player this year, and for good reason because of that highly productive Ana. Statistically, he was one of the best. That goes without question. He was one of 8 players with at least 10k healing per 10. Along with that great healing and cooldown management was also the fact that he played Ana in such a smart way. In years past, Izayaki didn't quite have the same intangibles, I would say, to make him a top support player, but man, was that not the case in 2021. He was tied for the second least number of deaths per 10 on Ana at 4.5, showing that his smarts and overall positioning were top tier. there were a good number of games where you could really feel his smarts and his presence shine through. Anytime Izayaki got to play Ana in a big tournament match or the grand finals even, it was a GG for the opponent. His commanding presence could only be matched by very few, but none of them could seem to match up with him when it came to efficiency, which is why I believe that Izayaki was the league's top Ana player. Now we talk about Baptiste, and the level of play on this character saw a bit of a jump in my eyes. Now, if we're being honest, the best Baptiste in the league was easily Shu, without a doubt. However, I think some honorable mentions have to go out to the likes of Fielder and Iris and Izayaki and even Crimzo, because these guys all deserve recognition for great performances on this specific hero. But again, we all know this has to go to Shu. Shu's BAP during Season 4 was one of the most hyper-carry-oriented we have ever seen. It was very 2020 Violet-esque in terms of playmaking. His healing was admittedly not top tier necessarily, but the amount of damage and game-changing plays he made for the Glads more than makes up for that. How many big games were the Glads winning this year where it kind of felt like Shu's BAP was the thing we'd all be freaking out over? Think of the big kills he got against the likes of Chengdu and the Shock and critical tournament matches. Leading the league in every damage average as BAP is not fair, and it all came on an efficient 5 deaths per 10. Shu's BAP was disgusting. That's all I've got for BAP though, so now it's time for everybody's favorite hero, Kappa, Brigitte. There were like 4 to 5 noticeably solid break players. I think the ones that stood out to me were Skewed, Yveltal, Lee Jae-gun, and Dridro. Ultimately though, I brought it down to Yveltal and Skewed. I went back and forth on my choice for a while, but ultimately picked Skewed. Yveltal, he's super close behind, but I think that Skew had the better overall consistency. Yveltal definitely does deserve a lot of praise because he had tons of shining moments and he literally led the league in healing, damage, final blows, and eliminations per 10, which is insane, but Skewed put up very similar numbers over a longer stretch of time. Yveltal's relevance mainly came in the second half of this year, but Skewed was high impact right from the very beginning basically, even when he was coming off the bench in a rotation. Skewed's break was simply more memorable in my eyes. It takes real talent to stand out on a team where you're playing next to Shu, who was arguably the #1 flex support in the league. If your break play can be that effective, then you probably deserve to win this type of honor, hence why I do not feel bad giving this to Skewed over Yveltal despite it being a tight race. But what about Lucio? I'd say this one is a bit easier. Out of all Lucio players, the most elite one in my opinion has to be Lee Jae-gun. Honorable mention goes out to Masa for being hella underrated this year, but Lee Jae-gun was the one and only leader with this character. Just like with last year, he was an aggressive player and he just made that type of style work in the Dragon system. But unlike back then, I think his competition on this hero was pretty little. His carry-oriented Lucio saw him post top 2 or better on every single damage category. He took Boop God to a whole new level. Him and Fate were on point with their coordination. Any sort of control map meant that Lee Jae-gun was a big-time threat, as he locked up 23 environmental kills in less than 6 hours. Every person ranked ahead of Lee Jae-gun in terms of total environmental kills on Lucio has at least 3 more hours than him. It's scary to think that he was only 15 behind Jaxei, who more than tripled his playtime on Lucio. Lijiang Tower was simply Lee Jae-gun's map. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. We're gonna go with any Lucio-friendly map. It was all about Lee Jae-gun in those situations. He carried with those environmental kills and clutch beats and crazy coordination. I can really appreciate his ability to make plays on his own as well, despite being at the main support position. And while boops are the biggest factor that made him so great in terms of getting kills, he was genuinely also a top healer, as he finished with the highest healing rate per 10 by a decent margin. So in addition to being the top playmaker, he was also just the best all-around Lucio, which makes him the only right choice for this award. On the topic of main support heroes, it's Mercy time. She's a relatively boring hero that most of us don't care much for, but if we really get into the nitty-gritty and analyze who played her the most effectively, you can easily limit your options down to either Yveltal or Lee Jae-gun. Statistically, they were both the best, and they usually did a great job with positioning and getting the res off when needed. Any longtime supporter of my channel probably knows where I'm going to go with this one, and they might even get mad at me, but for the 3rd year in a row, my best Mercy player of the league is Yveltal. Call it boring, biased, or unoriginal, but Yveltal has this character down to a science. His consistency never seems to waver, and this year was no different. Like in years past, Yveltal had great stats. With over 9k healing and 4.1 deaths per 10, Yveltal proved to be one of the most productive and efficient Mercy players in the league, and of course, Yveltal is better than anybody else with that Battle Mercy. If there is one man I fear when popping Valkyrie, it has to be him. 25 final blows in 6.5 hours is pretty nuts. It's the same as Lee Jae-gon, but with less playtime. I simply adored Yveltal's Mercy. It was always something that Chengdu could depend on. He plays this character so right. Small death rate, good heals, good with the pistol, smart with his reses, high awareness, body blocking, the list of good traits goes on. And he had a 68% win rate on her, which means that Yveltal's Mercy was pretty goated. End of discussion. Okay, but what about another boring hero, like Moira? I mean, is there really anyone else to pick here aside from Fielder? This one's pretty easy. Fielder's level of play on Moira during the Winston Rush meta was unmatchable. Trying to battle him in the mirror was futile. He knew exactly what he had to do. He'd just hard pocket the tanks and get Cole every single fight while staying in safety. Over 21,000 healing per 10 minutes is just so ridiculously stupid. Like, how do you even reach a number that high? The man did 1.3 million total healing on this one character. Fielder's Moira was the ultimate team enabler. They never had anything to fear because he could literally just engage with Coalescence every single fight because he was charging them up that fast. And last, but certainly not least, in this best player on every hero video is Zenyatta. Zen play in 2021 was pretty fun to watch. Maybe not what it was back in its heyday like 2018, 2019, but it was still pretty awesome nonetheless. And with that level of play came a bunch of noteworthy performers like Shu, Lastro, Violet, Jonek, Alarm, God rest his soul, and Crimzo. They were all excellent. However, I prefer Izayaki as my number one Zen on the year. I for one thought that he was the best playmaking Zen. There's a bunch of sweet pop-off moments out of him on Zen this year that you could easily find, and he had the best elim and final blow rate. It kind of correlates with that, I would say. He provided a nice bit of extra playmaking potential for those moments where like Fleta or maybe Lip or Fate weren't getting the job done. Izayaki reached top 3 or better on every damage stat across the board. His Zen was fantastic against all of the APAC teams, plus anyone who crossed paths with him from North America. Sometimes he'd just get really aggro, which usually led to him completely taking over a team fight. Whether you like it or not, he had more moments than just about anybody else, hence why I had to go with him as the number one Zenyatta over anybody else. But yeah, that's just about everything I have to say about Izayaki being the number one Zen of Season 4, which means that this video now comes to a close. So many of you guys have been asking about this video for the longest time now, so I'm happy I was finally able to break it out for you guys. Also, I apologize for the wait on this one. College was keeping me busy. I know a bunch of you were waiting patiently, and I appreciate that. So do me a favor now, like this video and share it with an Overwatch League loving friend to spread the word of it, if you will. I worked really hard on this, it took up a lot of my time, so it would mean so much to me if we could get this video to blow up like the previous ones. The one from last year did amazing, and I know you guys could help me do the same, if not even better with this one. Thanks in advance for the support on this, it really does mean the world to me. I'm grateful for each and every one of you for making this possible. If you want to watch more content similar to this one though, check out my best player on every hero video from the previous 2 years with these end cards, and subscribe to my channel if you're new. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.